Koryth drifted inside his own head while he stared out the classroom window, watching the strange balance between light and shadow that never really changed. On a tidally locked world like his, the idea of a normal day didn't mean much anyway. There was no sunrise to wait for, no sunset to mark the end of anything. We were born on what most species would call a death world, a place where life had no business surviving at all. One side burned under endless heat, the other froze in permanent darkness. And yet, life persisted. The fact that I existed at all was proof enough of that. Around me sat other young graders, kids my age, all bipedal, all covered in soft white scales. We shared the same wide eyes and the same black mark at the top of our heads. That dark spot wasn't decoration. It worked like a third eye, an organ designed to track the stars that never changed position in our sky. Stars that slowly repeated their cycles year after year on a planet without day or night. Our species wasn't alone in that trait. Several native animals had evolved the same feature, a natural compass for a world locked in eternal twilight along its narrow habitable band. Rows of desks stretched across the room, each one occupied by another grader like me. The only being who didn't belong was the professor. He was an off-worlder, blue-skinned, and fond of calling himself a wisdom guide. He was one of many sent to drag our people from cave shelters to starships in just 10 generations. That transformation came fast. Too fast. It felt less like progress and more like being shoved forward whether we were ready or not. Most of my people were still trying to figure out their place in a galaxy that never missed a chance to remind us how primitive we used to be. I snapped back to the classroom when the professor's voice cut through the low background noise. There it was again, that familiar edge of condescension. It was as constant as the unmoving sky outside. We weren't just students of science here. We were reminders of our own shortcomings. He stood at the front of the room, his blue skin standing out sharply against our pale scales. His arms moved dramatically, like they always did when he spoke. Today, he announced, we will discuss spinning planets, and why they represent the standard across all civilized species of the Galactic Federation. I watched him turn toward the main display. Zyron, because of course it was Zyron, flicked through the slides with a casual motion. We'd all learned to associate his name with frustration and quiet embarrassment. The screen lit up, showing a rotating blue and green sphere. Compared to our frozen world, it looked impossibly alive. Life, Zyron continued, favors rotation. He explained how spinning planets created cycles of light and darkness, how those cycles drove evolution, formed weather systems, spread resources, and established biological rhythms that organized life itself. Then he paused. I recognized that pause. It always came right before the blow landed. How unfortunate, he said smoothly. That species such as yours would have virtually no chance of reaching space at all, if not for the generosity of the Galactic Federation. His face twisted into what he probably thought was a warm smile. To us, it felt like being patted on the head. You should be grateful, he went on. Without our guidance, you would still be crouched in caves, staring into eternal twilight, wondering whether the burning lands or the frozen wastes mattered for any reason beyond survival. I glanced around the room. The looks on my classmates' faces were painfully familiar. Sadness, resignation, silence. We listened to the wisdom guide speak session after session, but we were rarely allowed to speak ourselves. Most of us had never even left our planet. And being halfway through the uplifting process meant we existed in a dangerous gap, knowing just enough to be corrected, ridiculed, or dismissed whenever we tried to contribute. Every failed attempt stuck in memory, burning like the heat from the bright side of our world. The classroom had become a place where questions died before reaching the air. Curiosity, the thing that should have defined us, had been slowly crushed by mockery and fear. No one wanted to sound ignorant in front of a teacher who seemed to enjoy proving that we were. Zyron stopped pacing. His long blue fingers folded together as he moved slowly across the front of the room. Each step felt deliberate, like he was measuring the distance between what he knew and what we didn't. Behind him, the display changed. Now it showed a cross-section of our planet. A thin glowing band marked the habitable zone, trapped between endless fire and endless night. Well then, Zyron said, his voice sharpening. I recognized that tone too. Who can tell me why your planet is an exception among tidally locked worlds? Surely someone here remembers something from our earlier lessons. I felt my third eye twitch. It reacted to stress the same way it did to shifting stars. I remembered the lessons. All of them, too clearly. Our sun was a small red star, weaker than most, not one of the blazing giants that ruled other habitable systems. Our continent sat perfectly in the middle of the twilight band, where temperatures allowed liquid water to exist. Violent ocean currents moved heat from the burning side to the frozen side, redistributing energy in patterns scientists were still struggling to fully map. A thick atmosphere wrapped the planet like insulation, softening extremes that should have wiped life out completely. And above all, a powerful magnetic field shielded us from stellar radiation that should have stripped that atmosphere away ages ago. I knew every detail. The facts sat neatly in my mind, memorized and ordered, explaining the miracle of how I was even alive at all. I didn't raise my hand, and when I glanced around the room, I had the feeling most of the others were making the same decision. The silence dragged on, stretching longer than it should have, until it started to feel awkward. Zarwana's face shifted from patient expectation to visible irritation, his blue skin darkening slightly as his mood turned. "Come now," he said sharply. "Even primitive deathworlders from a tidally locked planet like yours should be capable of recalling previous lessons. This is basic planetary science." He sneered. "You do intend to become more than cave dwellers playing with technology you barely understand, don't you?" I could tell many of my classmates knew the answer. It showed in the way their eyes followed the professor, in the way a few hands twitched upward before being forced back down. But no one spoke. We all knew how this would end. Anyone who answered would be dissected. Every small mistake would be magnified, every imperfect word used as proof of how far we still were from being considered truly civilized. Zyron never missed a chance to remind us. The seconds ticked by. The silence grew heavier, pressing down on my chest with every breath. And then, without really planning to, I lifted my hand. I still don't know why I did it. Maybe the quiet itself became unbearable. Maybe I was tired of watching my classmates shrink into themselves, cycle after cycle. My arm felt heavier than it should have, like it was fighting the weight of every time I'd chosen to stay silent before. "Ah," Zerwen said, his voice soaked in sarcasm as he pointed at me. "At least someone here isn't completely stupid." He smiled thinly. "Yes, you, the one in black. Please enlighten us with your wisdom." But instead of answering his question about our planet, something else slipped out of my mouth before I could stop it. "Professor Zryn," I asked, "isn't there a spinning death world somewhere in the galaxy? Is it really true that all death worlds are tidally locked, just like ours?" The reaction was instant. Every head in the room turned toward me at once. Wide eyes stared back, filled with surprise, and something else. Curiosity. I saw several of them nod slightly, like I'd voiced a question they all shared but had been too afraid or too smart to ask. At the same time, there was fear in their looks too. Fear that I'd crossed a line and that whatever came next would fall on all of us. The professor stopped walking. For a moment, he just stood there, completely still, his expression impossible to read. Then he turned and began moving down the aisle toward me, his steps slow and deliberate. Halfway there, he stopped. "Yes," he said, drawing the word out. His voice coated in forced patience that somehow felt worse than anger. "There is a spinning death world within the Federation. And no, not all death worlds are tidally locked, though they are the most common type hostile to life as we define it." He hesitated, as if debating whether to continue, then seemed to decide that it no longer mattered. "It is called Zithara," Zerwan said carefully, like the word itself left a bitter taste. "It is classified as a death world due to its extreme gravity and the vast number of biological threats that evolved there under intense competition. According to every reasonable model, sapient life should never have developed on that planet." His eyes narrowed. "And yet it did. Much like your own species managed to emerge against all probability." Then his expression hardened. Those murderous primitives from Zithera hardly deserve academic attention. They represent the exact opposite of what a sapient species should strive to become. They are aggressive, territorial, and have waged countless wars against one another. Conflicts that nearly drove them to extinction more than once. He straightened, his voice growing louder as he addressed the entire room, though his eyes never left me. Therefore, your question is disruptive. Let me be absolutely clear. Questions like this are no longer permitted. He spread his hands slightly. Discussing certain ideas could endanger the future of your species as citizens of the Galactic Federation. Is that understood? The reaction hit the classroom like a shockwave. Whispers erupted instantly. Students leaned toward one another, forming tight little clusters. I heard the word Zithera repeated again and again, passed around like contraband, suddenly far more valuable because it had been forbidden. I couldn't catch most of what was being said from my seat at the back, but I felt the shift in the air. The professor hadn't crushed curiosity. He'd ignited it. I was startled when Fexer and Kelthra turned toward me. Fexer, whose scales were darker than most, leaned close and whispered, "We should go to the library before the next session. Look up Zithera." Kelthra, smaller and always smiling like she was planning trouble, nodded eagerly. "Yes, if it's a death world and the professor doesn't want us talking about it, then it has to be interesting." A knot of hesitation tightened in my stomach. Access to the galactic databases was restricted for species still undergoing uplift. We weren't supposed to search freely. And yet, something about the way Zithera had been forbidden made it impossible to ignore. Technically, we were allowed access, but everyone knew what that really meant. Our permissions were watched, filtered, and constantly evaluated. Step too far outside approved topics, and that access could disappear without warning. Digging into forbidden subjects was a good way to invite trouble, the kind that didn't stop with you. It could reach your family, your academic standing, even whatever future the Federation had planned for you. That thought made my stomach tighten. Still, when I looked at Fexer and Kelthra, at the excitement written plainly across their faces, and when I felt the echo of my own question still burning in my chest, I found myself giving a small nod. "All right," I whispered. "We can try. At least once." The rest of the session barely registered. Zyron kept talking, but his words passed right through me. Meaningless noise. My thoughts were already somewhere else, already inside the library, already searching for answers about a forbidden, spinning death world called Zithera. When the class finally ended, the three of us didn't follow the usual routine. Instead of joining the stream of students heading toward the transit platforms that would take them back to their homes in the habitable band, we peeled away and stopped in front of the library. The building stood out among the older campus structures. It was new, built by the uplifting committee using off-world materials. Its smooth synthetic walls reflected the eternal twilight, making it look almost unreal against the familiar stone and metal around it. Fexer and Kelthra seemed confident, almost too confident, that we'd find something. Their excitement was contagious, even if my worries refused to fade. "The professor won't flag the topic immediately," Fexer whispered. "That stuff takes time." He wasn't wrong. Federation bureaucracy moved at a glacial pace. "This," he added quietly, "is our window. Right now was our best chance to learn something about that spinning death world before restrictions slammed shut." We entered together as the doors slid open at our approach. Inside, the library felt like a bridge between eras. It carried echoes of our cave-dwelling past while pointing toward a future among the stars. A few physical books sat on shelves, their presence mostly symbolic. Relics from species that still valued the feel of pages despite having digitized everything long ago. Most students preferred neural interfaces. Those systems allowed direct immersion into Federation virtual spaces, letting users explore entire star systems without ever standing up. But that wasn't what we were after. We headed for the touchscreens instead. Flat panels mounted on sleek stands throughout the room. From there, we could access the galactic database and send messages across systems. Not that many of us had off-world contacts. Our species was only 2 generations into uplift, and advanced tech access was usually limited to schools or Federation work assignments. The three of us exchanged a glance. No words were needed. Determination passed silently between us. We moved quickly to the nearest touchscreen and relaxed when we saw they were all empty. Most students had already gone home, eager to escape another session of being reminded how primitive they were supposed to feel. Kelthra stepped forward first. Her fingers moved fast as she entered Zithra, spelling it phonetically in our own script. She leaned closer, eyes fixed on the display. The screen flickered. Then it went blank. No results found. Vexer and I burst out laughing before we could stop ourselves. Maybe try spelling it differently? I said, keeping my voice light, trying not to sound smug. Kelthra shot us a glare that promised payback later. She cleared the search field and tried again. This time, she entered spinning deathworld, using broader terms we knew the database would recognize. The system processed the query. The pause felt endless. Then success. Text and images began flooding the display, one line after another, filling the screen with data. She'd found it. We crowded closer, shoulders nearly touching, eyes wide as we started reading about the human homeworld for the very first time. The entry for Zithra in the database was huge, packed with details that felt more like a warning than actual information. The Federation's usual bureaucratic wording didn't hide the edge of worry, or maybe it was straight-up fear that seeped through every line. "Listen to this," Vexer muttered, reading aloud in a low tone so the library's monitoring systems wouldn't pick it up. She was dead serious when she said that galactic citizens were strongly advised against traveling to Zithra, even though formal agreements with the human government existed. Apparently, Zithra's environment was seriously dangerous for almost any species. Gravity could cause stress injuries, microbes could be deadly, and the native wildlife, well, let's just say it wasn't exactly friendly. Koryth leaned closer, his eyes scanning everything as fast as he could. "Wait, so they have agreements to travel there, but they're telling people not to go? That's kind of contradictory," he said. "Check this part out," Kelthra said, scrolling down further. "They're talking about human military tech. Even though humans were considered a pre-contact civilization not too long ago, they've got weapons that can match or even outclass many Federation systems. Why humans focus so much on military stuff wasn't clear, though it seemed tied to their long history of internal conflict. The entry warned, "Approach human military bases with extreme caution." "They're scared of them," Vexer said quietly. The Federation was actually scared of humans. They called them primitive, but the fear of their weapons was obvious. As the entry went on, every new detail left the three of us more and more impressed. The deadliest predators lived on Zithra, creatures shaped by an environment so brutal that survival had turned them into things straight out of nightmares. The database showed images of massive reptiles with jaws that could crush bone, cats the size of small vehicles with retractable claws, and deep-sea monsters that looked almost impossible. "Why don't humans get rid of them?" Kelthra asked, reading a note about the Federation's own bafflement. "It says humans actually protect species that can kill them. They conserve the hunters. And the analysis team can't understand why," she added, shaking her head. But the final part of the entry is what really blew us away, the fact that made everything else seem minor. Zithra ranked higher on the deathworld scale than planets like ours, mostly because of one staggering reason: humans had never needed uplifting. "We disembarked," Drimmick said, his voice low, almost reverent. "Humans had reached the galactic stage entirely on their own. They figured out faster-than-light travel without anyone showing them the way, created their own artificial intelligence, and built space stations and colonies without asking the Federation for help or permission. And all of this came despite the planet they were born on, a brutal, almost hostile world, and despite the countless wars that nearly wiped them out more than once. Somehow they survived. They thrived. And eventually they reached for the stars entirely on their own terms." The three of us just stood there for a long moment, taking it in. Every other species we had studied had followed the same path. Discovered by the Federation, uplifted carefully through a combination of technology and cultural guidance, introduced to the galactic community like toddlers learning to walk. But humans had done it themselves. They had clawed their way up from a spinning death world purely through grit, creativity, and sheer will. In a way, they're like us, Fexer said quietly. But they did it without anyone holding their hand. The weight of that realization sank in slowly, unshakable. Drimmick felt something shift in his chest. A mix of admiration, longing, and maybe even a little resentment. Here was proof that a species from a death world could succeed without the Federation's constant, condescending guidance, without the endless reminders of how primitive they were, without carefully monitored access to knowledge and tech. We left the screens and wandered over to one of the empty tables scattered through the library, forming a small cluster as we sat down. For a while, no one spoke. We were each lost in our own thoughts, trying to process what we'd just learned. Finally, Kelthra broke the silence. "You know what bugs me the most?" she asked. "What's that?" Drimmick replied. "That we'll never know what we might have been on our own. Maybe we'd have figured it out eventually, like humans did. Maybe we could have developed our own tech, our own way of reaching the stars. But we'll never know," Fexer added, her voice quiet, "because the Federation got here first. Everything we have, everything we know, it all comes from them. It would have been better if humans were the ones uplifting us," Drimmick said suddenly, the words surprising even him. "At least they'd understand what it's like to come from a world that's trying to kill you. They know what survival really means," Kelthra said, though her voice lacked certainty. "The Federation found US first. That's just how it happened," Fexer agreed. "Maybe we can still change how we think about the future," Drimmick said. We sat in silence for a few more moments, until Drimmick's eyes landed on a public datapad someone had left behind. Its screen was dark, but a tiny light showed it was still on. And then the thought hit him, a wild, impulsive, probably pointless idea, but he couldn't shake it. "What if we sent them a message?" he said. Fexer and Kelthra looked at him, eyebrows raised. "Who? Humans. What if we sent a message to Zithra? Told them about our situation. Asked if it would be possible, I don't know, to visit there at least once in our lives? Just to see what a real spinning death world is like." "That's crazy," Kelthra said, but she was already reaching for the datapad, fingers brushing across the screen to wake it up. "They'd probably never even see it. We're nobodies, just students on a backwater death world that barely even gets a footnote in galactic history," Drimmick said. "But what if they did see it?" Fexer leaned forward, her enthusiasm growing. "What's the worst that could happen? They ignore it and we're right back where we started. But if they respond, then we'd have contact with a species that actually gets what it means to come from a place like ours," Drimmick finished. We passed the datapad around, each of us adding our own touch to the message. Drimmick wrote about the professor's reactions, about how just asking questions about Zithra could be seen as disruptive, trying to convey his frustration with the limits placed on our curiosity. Fexer handled the practical side, explaining the rules for mid-uplifting species and the systems that monitored our access to information and technology. Kelthra added the emotional core, what it felt like to be constantly reminded that we were primitive, treated like children who couldn't handle the world. Together, we crafted something that was part plea, part introduction, and part quiet rebellion. A message sent into the void, with no real expectation of a reply. Even if nothing came of it, Drimmick thought, even if it disappeared into the vast web of galactic communications never to be read by human eyes, it was still worth doing. It was a moment of control, a small act of defiance against the systems that tried to limit us. A memory we could share, and that was enough. We sent it, watched it slide into the outgoing queue, sat back, half in disbelief, half in exhilaration. "Well," Fexer said, "now we wait and see if anything happens." "Nothing will," Kelthra said, but she was smiling. "Still, it feels good to try," Drimmick said, and for the first time in what felt like ages, he felt lighter. We'd reached out across the stars to a species that might actually understand us in ways the Federation never could. Even if the answer never came, just asking had been worth it. Weeks, or maybe months, slipped by, measured by the unchanging sky and the relentless grind of classes that seemed determined to chew up whatever enthusiasm and curiosity we still had. I caught myself drifting off more and more during Professor Tlilis' lectures, my mind wandering to spinning planets and civilizations that had somehow made it to the stars all on their own. The message we'd sent to Zithra faded into the background of my thoughts. Another what if, in a life that felt full of them. Then, one day, as another of Tlilis' lectures was winding down and I was tuning out as usual, his droning voice explaining the proper protocols for requesting tech transfers from Federation oversight committees, I noticed something different. First came a deep thrum, a vibration that shook the walls and floor more than it was heard. And then the windows lit up, not with the dim red glow of our sun, but with something sharper, hotter, impossible to ignore. Everyone's third eyes instinctively snapped skyward, expecting some strange stellar phenomenon. But it wasn't a star. A ship was landing right there on the academy grounds right beside our classroom. It was nothing like the Federation vessels I knew, no sleek, graceful curves, no careful design. This ship had attitude. Its hull was mottled gray, covered in angular markings I didn't recognize, and it landed with a confidence that said, I don't care about rules or landing zones. Professor Tlill froze mid-sentence, his blue skin paling almost to lavender. We all just stared as a ramp extended from the side of the ship, and figures began to climb out. Humans. My heart hammered in my chest. I recognized them from the database, bipedal like us but bulkier, denser, built for a high-gravity world. They moved casually, dark uniforms adorned with strange insignia, almost predatory in the way they walked. The one at the front, clearly the leader, strode to our classroom door and knocked. The sound was ridiculously ordinary, almost polite, which made the drama of their arrival feel absurd. Tlill blinked, then shook himself like a creature coming out of a trance. He stomped to the door and yanked it open, his face cycling through confusion, anger, and maybe fear. What are you doing here? He demanded, his voice higher than usual. This landing is completely unauthorized, he barked. You shouldn't even be on this planet. The human at the front, captain, I guessed from his uniform, spoke in heavily accented Federation standard, but it was clear and firm. We're here to talk to a group of young students. Tlilis' face went from shock to full-on outrage as he realized this wasn't a mistake. Your species is not allowed on this planet. Federation law forbids unauthorized visits during the uplifting process of any species. You need to leave immediately. Come back in a few centuries if you want formal contact with the natives. The captain just stared at him, and somehow his look cut across species lines. Small eyes, laser-focused, narrowing with disapproval. Human laws allow us to be here after being invited, he said. Invited. Tlill repeated the word like it didn't exist. His gaze whipped across the classroom, suspicion and anger radiating off him. Who? He started, but never finished. He shoved at the captain, hands on the man's chest, trying to force him out. Among greater, that kind of push would have sent someone stumbling. But the human didn't budge. Excuse me, the captain said, calm as ever, and then he moved. His hand came up gently but firmly, and Tlill went down in a clumsy heap, feet tangling as he hit the floor. Most of the class struggled to keep from laughing, hands pressed over mouths, scales flushing as we tried to hold it together. The captain stepped fully into the room, his crew following behind. They filed along the walls, silent but present, their very existence a challenge to the order we'd always known. The captain's gaze swept the room, locking eyes with a few of us before he spoke. A group of students from this class, he said, sent a message to Zithra. They wanted to know if it might be possible to visit our planet one day, and what it would cost. They asked if they could save credits their whole lives just to make the trip. The captain paused, letting that sink in. I came here to answer that message, he said. My whole body went numb. I could feel Fexer and Kelthra frozen beside me, their scales paling in shock. Shock that probably mirrored my own. That impulsive, impossible message we'd sent. It had been read. Not just read either. It had been read by someone who thought it important enough to cross the galaxy just to reply. The classroom went completely silent. Students turned to one another, eyes wide, trying to guess who could have sent it. I noticed my friends looked even more stunned than the rest of us, their postures practically screaming guilty knowledge. But the captain's smile was calm, almost knowing. He understood. He admitted that nobody knew what to do with the message at first. It had bounced through communication networks for a while, getting passed up the chain, until eventually it landed on the desk of someone with the authority to act. And a decision had been made. His gaze swept the room again, but this time there was something protective in it. A clear signal that he wasn't here to punish whoever had sent the message. "I will not reveal who sent it," he said firmly. "You can all relax. Our cybersecurity team erased every trace of it from your systems. There will be no repercussions from the Federation." From the floor, Tlill let out a strangled sound of protest, but the captain ignored him completely. "Someone here wants to visit Zythera," he continued, his smile widening. "So humanity is extending an invitation to every single student in this class." He made it clear there would be no punishment. "We've already negotiated this with the Federation Council. They're not thrilled, but they've agreed not to interfere." Confusion and hope flickered across the faces of everyone in the room. Even Tlill, sprawled on the floor, looked torn between outrage and disbelief, unsure what authority he still had, or how to respond to humans who simply didn't follow Federation rules. The captain's smile softened, turning bright and genuine, pure excitement that needed no translation. He spread his arms wide, asking the question that would change everything. "So, who wants to see a spinning death world?" Years later, looking back with the perspective of time and experience, I would marvel at how a single impulsive message could alter so many lives. Every student in that classroom accepted the offer. Even the ones terrified of the unknown, worried about danger or consequences, couldn't resist a chance that had literally fallen into our laps like a gift from the stars. That one message had changed my life and the lives of countless others. It had cracked open a door the Federation had tried to keep shut, revealing possibilities they had deliberately hidden from us. I remember that first cycle on Zythera, when I finally understood what it really meant to experience a day. The planet's constant spinning made me dizzy at first. My inner ear struggled to process the motion, while my mind struggled even more. The sun rose and set again and again, a rhythm nothing like the eternal twilight back home. My third eye, designed to track the slow-moving stars of a tidally locked world, was utterly confused by Zythera's rapidly changing sky, making many of us sick during those early rotations. That first night on Zythera was brutal. The star-tracking organs couldn't handle the fast-moving constellations, and several of my classmates became genuinely ill, bodies rebelling against sensations we'd never evolved to encounter. And yet, despite the nausea, the disorientation, even the dizzying sense that the ground itself was moving, we loved it. We each found at least one human friend, building bonds that transcended species, culture, and the immense gaps between our worlds. The humans showed us what it meant to live on a death world, not apologetically, not with shame, but honestly. They took us through their cities, their wildernesses, their museums, and monuments that celebrated survival against all odds. They shared their history, the messy, brutal truth, full of failures, wars, and near extinctions, and how they had survived through cooperation, stubbornness, and sheer determination. And they shared something even more important, that living on a harsh world didn't make you primitive or weak. It gave you perspective, strength, and resilience that softer worlds could never understand. In the end, humanity forced the Federation to let us keep in contact with Zythera. It wasn't simple. There were diplomatic incidents, tense negotiations, and moments where the whole project might have collapsed. But the humans were persuasive. They made an offer the Federation simply couldn't refuse. That ongoing contact, the relationships we built, sparked what amounted to a revolution generations later. Our planet became the first death world to reject uplifting mid-process, choosing its own path rather than the one the Federation had laid out. And it all started because humanity had helped us, not just morally, but with practical assistance the Federation couldn't legally stop. Of course, there were costs. We progressed more slowly than we might have under full Federation support. Technology arrived in fits and starts, knowledge was harder to come by, and we faced struggles that careful Federation oversight could have avoided. But humanity had given us something even more valuable than rapid progress or easy solutions. They gave us the chance to shape our own path, to stumble, fail, and succeed on our own terms, without someone hovering, ready to catch us before we could learn from our mistakes. Looking back across the cycles, standing on the foundation of a society that was truly ours, I couldn't help but feel that the trade-off had been worth it. Sure, we were slower, rougher around the edges, and less polished than we might have been under Federation guidance, but we were free. Free to ask the questions we wanted without fear. Free to make mistakes, to learn, and to grow from them. Free to decide, finally, what kind of civilization we wanted to become. And it all began with a single question in a classroom, a forbidden inquiry about a spinning death world, and 3 friends brave, or foolish, enough to send a message into the void and hope for an answer. The humans answered. And by answering, they didn't just respond, they changed our future.